which means there's no one in Shamima's school who can be like, hey, what are the kind of ideas floating around in the youth here, and how do we actually have a conversation about these things? People are just out of their depth. So, boring England with no
conviction,
with no core except go to school and go to work,
and democracy and freedom of speech,
democracy and be nice to women and minorities, right? It's, just this sort of shallow shell of what England is supposed to represent. And then suddenly somebody presents young 15-year-old Shamima with, hey, you are meant to restore the order of God in the world. Leave your boring life like Harry Potter. Come to Islamic Hogwarts and become who you're supposed to
be. Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Welcome, everybody, today to another episode of Christ and Caliphate. Today we're going to talk about Shamima Begum, and honestly, it's kind of hard to know what's what with this case. The media seems to be all over it, and it's kind of hard to get deep into the sources and original sources, but we're going to do our best here. So, who is Shamima Begum?
So Shamima Begum is a Bangladeshi girl who grew up in England. She's British, right? Her parents are from Bangladesh, but she is born in England. And then
London, I think.
Yeah, in London. Bethnal Green, East London. And she, along with two other school friends, left England to go join ISIS right as they were on the rise.
When was that?
2014, I believe.
Okay.
Is when she joined, and she married an ISIS fighter and had 3 children, all of whom were died, and then eventually was captured by, I believe, Kurdish forces, but there was a pretty wide coalition fighting ISIS. Everyone hated ISIS. It's Iran, the Kurds, the Syrian government, the Iraqi government, the Americans, the Russians. Like everyone could agree that no one liked ISIS, right?
That's right.
So Shamima Begum was captured and has been in refugee camps in Syria ever since, and all of her children have died, and she's basically had no prospects since then.
And is stateless.
Yeah, it's stateless. So the British government revoked Shamima Begum's citizenship.
Right. Which means what? You know.
It means she cannot leave the refugee camp in Syria. Like, she can't go to Bangladesh, she can't go to England, she can't go to Belgium where her husband was from. She just has absolutely no recourse, and no country wants her. She essentially does not have any future on the planet outside of the walls of the refugee camp she's currently living in.
It's like The Terminal, but with ISIS. The movie The Terminal.
With Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks.
I haven't seen that.
No, okay.
I need to see that.
No, I actually didn't see that either, but I remember the movie being...
I mean, the premise is that he's stuck at the airport.
Oh my God.
He has no visas. He can't leave the airport, right? So he winds up setting camp in the airport
awful.
and like kind of living there. And
You could make it work.
Yeah.
Should we break down her life a little bit according to what we've been able to read up on?
So I think where we should start with this actually is we should actually kind of like look at the first interview she gave to BBC.
Sure.
And then we should kind of react to that, and then space it out a little bit, and then look at the look at a recent interview that she's given, and kind of contrast those two. So let's jump into that.
But what you've got to remember is that the very fact of you and your friends as 15-year-olds joining the Islamic State, that was an endorsement of them. That was a propaganda victory for them. You helped them. You helped the enemy of Britain.
But I wasn't the one that put myself. I didn't want to be on the news at first. I know a lot of people, after they saw that me and my friends came, they actually encouraged them. Like I did hear, yeah, a lot of people were encouraged to come after I left, but I wasn't the one that put myself on the news. We didn't want to be on the news.
So here's your opportunity then to apologise to some of the people who were murdered by the group that you joined. Some of the British men, some of the women, some of the kids from Manchester who were killed in the Manchester arena. You must have heard about that attack. What did you think about that?
I was shocked, but
What?
I just couldn't. I didn't know about the kids actually, but I do feel that it's wrong that like innocent people did get killed. It's one thing to kill a soldier that is fighting you, it's self-defense, but to kill people like women and children, just like people, like the women and children in Baghuz that are being killed right now, unjustly by the bombings. It's a two-way thing, really, because women and children are being killed back in the Islamic State right now. And it's kind of retaliation. Like, their justification was that it was retaliation, so I thought, okay, that is a fair justification.
I still haven't heard you apologise to anybody.
Okay, yeah, I am sorry for all the families that have lost them, like husbands and sons and brothers, and I'm sorry for all the men that have lost their women and children because of the attacks back in the UK and other countries. It wasn't fair on them. They weren't fighting anyone. They weren't causing any harm. But neither was I, and neither are the women who are being killed right now back in Baghuz.
But I think you're wrong. You did cause harm because you helped this terrible regime which was murdering people, which was mounting terror attacks. You joined them. You gave them support. You became a poster girl for them.
Like I said, the poster girl thing was not my choice. I would not have, done that. But me just going there and being a housewife and just sitting at home and them taking care of me, it's not really in any way help. Like, I'm not paying for their bullets. I'm not paying for them to be trained. Yeah, I will admit I was the one that made the choice. Even though I was only 15 years old, I do have like, I could make my own decisions back there. I do have the like mentality to make my own decisions, and I did leave on my own, knowing that it was a risk. But yeah, I will admit it's my fault right now. I just want forgiveness, really, from the UK. Like, everything I've been through, I didn't expect I would go through that, and losing my children the way I lost them. I don't want to lose this baby as well. And this is really not a place to raise children. This camp, not. Maybe temporarily, but not permanently.
If the Islamic State hadn't fallen, if they hadn't been defeated, would you have stayed?
No, probably left.
Why do you think, after you've joined this group which has rejected everything that Britain has offered, that you should still be able to go back to Britain?
Because I don't actually agree with everything that they've done, and that's why I actually do support some British values, and I am willing to go back to the UK and settle down again and rehabilitate and like that stuff.
What do you think will happen to you when you go back to the UK?
My first priority is my son, obviously, because I don't know whether he'll be taken away from me or they'll let me keep him or give him to my family while the UK decide what to do with me, to put me in prison, to put me in a de-radicalization course. I don't know. I don't actually know. The problem is I don't know what my options are, what options I'll be given. So I don't want to just come back in and ask, I want this and this and this, because it's not really appropriate. My son, I want to raise him reading Qur'an, knowing how to pray and all these things. But jihad, I don't know.
Do you want to raise him as a British boy?
Yeah.
What does that mean for you, to be British?
British values, going to school, working go to UK. Having family there.
Democracy, freedom of speech, rights for women, rights for homosexuals, all of that.
So just to clarify, this was a couple of years ago. This was initially when she was taken out of the camp. I think it's like when she was discovered in the camp in 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thoughts just on this.
Yeah, thoughts just on this so far.
Oh, it made me very sad when knowing that all her children died and her third died, and that she was like, seems like her main goal in this interview was was for her kid. Like, whatever she said, whether it was real or not real, like, seems like what was real was that she wanted her kid to have a better, normal, I think she did want him to go to school and have stability, which was compelling.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like a person who got drunk and blacked out.
Yeah.
And is being told kind of what they did, right? And having like a loose awareness of the fact that things happen.
Yeah.
But then like, well, you know, the reason I did that wasn't
really me.
You know what I mean? But it doesn't understand the gravity of what it's done. You know what I mean? It'd be kind of like if you got so drunk that you passed out while you were driving and you know, like killed somebody, right, as a drunk driver or something like that, and you're just kind of like coming out of this fog. This is a little different.
No, I feel that.
She's like definitely cognizant of what she did, but the brainwashing is like starting to slide off, right?
Yeah,
bit.
but there's some of it that's like so clearly there.
Yeah, no, totally.
Because it's just like, well, what about all the women and children dying in Barbados right now?
It doesn't speak to like, so what you're looking for in an interview like this is a strong admission of guilt, right? And
sure,
essentially like a confession.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then what you want to see is somebody looking vulnerable, right? Like, I made a mistake. You know, you say that over and over and over again. Yeah. Like, I made a mistake. You know, I want to be held accountable for my actions, that kind of thing. And, you know, I hear you with the kid, right? Because she's totally trying to do that with her kid. She's trying to make her kid, you know, make a future for her kid, but not realizing that her actions are the ones that kind of like, right, regardless of whatever happens to your child, which unfortunately did die, you know, you created this situation. And what the world wants to hear right now is that you know it was wrong before we can move on to like,
which
we'll come back to Britain.
Yeah.
Right. She did, but it was like all the way, you know what I mean?
Right. It wasn't.
It's kind of like if you get in an argument with your spouse and then you're like, all right, fine, I'm wrong.
Yeah,
you know, after like an hour
that's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, it feels like she kind of realizes partway through that she needs to take this opportunity to say whatever she thinks people want to hear.
Right.
As a survival instinct for her child, because you're right, that mothering instinct is kind of first and foremost.
It's very powerful
at that point for her, right? So it's not that she's super against ISIS, and it's not that she's super like, oh yeah, England's great.
Yes.
It's, I need to be where my child is going to live, and that is not here. But it's just like, it was so depressing to me that when he asked her about, you're going to raise them with British values? Yeah, what are those? Going to school, going to work.
Sure.
And that's all she could say about being British.
I think that's a thing, yeah, is like she's coming from a super strong ideology. She even said like, yeah, I'm sure they'll want me to go to de-radicalization camp, not a camp, program. She's like aware of all that. But yeah, it's not like the person sitting in front of her interviewing her it's like, well, what are you offering? What are...
I mean, I like
what? Yeah,
I like the fact that he pushed back on her. You know, I thought that was like an intellectually honest moment where you're like, no, but you are complicit.
He was
right?
being honest.
Like,
yeah,
you're complicit in the things that like your actions led to deaths.
Yes.
You know, there's things that you need to be held accountable for.
Yes.
That I'm not hearing in your tone or your posture, or even in you know, like even in your words, like what you were saying. You know, it just seems all very superficial, right?
But it is what
English values. Oh, you know, wake up, take a shower, have coffee. You know, wake up, get out of bed, drag the comb across my head.
And that's when he's like democracy.
Yeah, sure.
These things.
The women's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Freedom, fine.
Yeah, that's right. You know?
Right. So what do we think? Yeah. What does that show though? The fact that she's just kind of.
Well, I actually think it's an indictment on British culture's inability to actually communicate the historical values that created British culture, to some extent. Right? Sure, it's a problem with her, but it's also a problem with British society in general and what it's actually trying to offer the world.
Sure.
So let's go to the second one of these.
Like, people need to understand that the situation I was in at the time when I was doing all those interviews, I had just come out of a war zone. Yeah. I just lost 2 kids. I was pregnant. Yeah. And I was afraid of all the women in the camp because I heard the stories about, you know, them killing people.
And do you know they actually didn't believe they had a baby? Some people.
I don't know.
You heard all that?
Well, I still watch Friends here.
Do you know they just had a Friends reunion?
Yeah, no, I wish I could have watched that. But I heard it wasn't that great anyway, so.
My wife put it on, right, and for me it was 2 hours of boredom. I put my headphones on and listened to some other crap.
That's an insult to Friends.
Who's your favourite of Friends? I bet you're Joey.
No, Chandler.
Yeah, she's clearly at least had a change of image. You know, she's in the full, you know, burqa regalia in the first clip, and now she's wearing a baseball cap and wearing no hijab and talking about Friends, right? That's the pretty huge tonal shift between 2019 and 2022.
Like, look at me, I'm more normal now.
Yeah.
Right. I'm clearly making an effort. You know, I think the hardest part though is to be able to look at some of the other things that she was accused of, right? Like being an enforcer in ISIS, you know, being given a rifle, you know, being a packer of suicide bombs, right? Like making sure that you know, the suicide vests were stitched properly so that the explosives were unable to be detected.
And that's all,
you know, being the morality police for other women in ISIS, being a recruiter for the IS.
And that was that Canadian intelligence, or I guess both. It was like just secret intelligence that was saying that was what.
I mean, my point is, I believe people can change, right? And I believe that, you know, to participate in anything like ISIS, right? It's essentially cult, and you have to. There's a level of brainwashing that happens, whether or not you're you know, completely brainwashed. You know what I mean? Like, you could be for what they say, but to have that level of submission to what they say, right? Have that level of buy-in. There's a certain amount of you know, brainwashing going on in that situation, and for people coming out of that, I can like really be sympathetic, but I also kind of, I mean, without jumping too far ahead, you know, I really think it's hard to look at the efforts like from a screen, right? Yeah. Without like talking to her and getting to know her and everything else like that, and seeing whether or not like there was a clear chain of custody in her mind where she's like, I'm letting go of the brainwashing and I'm starting to be more of a, you know, like active like participant in the society that I want to be a part of.
It's hard to tell like what's what, because who interviewed her? BBC?
Yeah.
Like with any news media, what do they want? Do they want her, you know, do they think that England should, like, what do those, you know, what is that organization, what are they advocating for? Like, do they want to help her, you know, put her story out there so that she can, you know, I don't know, whatever, be given citizenship or not, or maybe they don't want
like
that.
What,
so,
you mean like what light are they trying to
yeah, totally. I mean, I think that plays into it as well, and it's hard to know what is going on with her.
Right.
But I guess we can perhaps go into like asking ourselves, can secular UK framework deal with cults or extremism or any sort of like religious like in the religious extremism?
You're saying, how can?
Because the news media, they're not the government, they're not the UK government, but like it just seems like there's all these parties that are like unable to deal with her the fact that she was a religious extremist. I mean, I guess the media, the news is pretty aligned with the government, I want to say.
Or BBC is literally a government news agency.
Oh, there you go.
But it's supposed to be sort of impartial with this. But I think, whether you're looking at the right or left in England, no one has a good framework for dealing with this.
With what?
Islamic extremism in general.
Or any.
Or any type of extremism. But, like, breaking this down, right? So, the England that Shamima Begum grew up in is very secular.
Yeah.
They don't really believe in a transcendent morality of any kind. Not even in a lot of secular governments, they get rid of that transcendent morality and they replace it with the government and the state. That has not happened in modern England. Modern England is just sort of self-consciously empty in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So because of that...
you're talking about like China?
Yeah, talking about China,
North Korea, where...
The communists...
The higher, what did you say? Higher transcendence?
Yeah, kind of the higher value system is kind of replaced by the government itself.
You're talking about a force. You're talking about a compelling force that transcends all the people of a nation.
Exactly. So
in China, that's the government.
That's the government. In the Soviet Union, that was communism. Mm-hmm. Right? In North Korea, it's Kim Jong-un. In England, you have this vacuum with nothing to replace it with. You just have this sort of empty, boring secularism. England is sort of an archetypally boring place to grow up.
Oh.
Right,
and that's by design, you think?
No, it's not by design. It's by accident. It's because England has forgotten its worldview foundations, right? Everything in British law and culture comes from a biblical worldview that has been secularized over time.
Right.
And I'm not stretching to say that.
No.
In any way, shape, or form, English common law is started by Alfred the Great as he basically adapts Deuteronomy as the legal framework for British law.
The Book of Deuteronomy.
Like England and Scotland became the UK because of the shared Protestant framework that they all believed in.
Right.
The English language was unified by the King James Bible, which unified the common language with the high language and taught everyone literacy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When the British coronation happens, they're crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they play the song Zadok the Priest, which is referring back to the coronation of King Solomon, right? The national anthem, the second verse.
I didn't know that one. That part.
In the national anthem, in the second verse, it says, not in this land alone, but let your mercies be known from sea to sea, and let the whole world see that men should but brothers be, right?
They're singing to God.
Yeah.
In the anthem.
And then the famous British war song, I Vow to Thee My Country, no earthly above, which the first verse is about a soldier dying for their country, but then in the second verse it's, there is another country whose, shores I know, we cannot count her armies, we cannot see her king, but it advances soul by soul and silently.
Yeah, it's talking about Jesus and Christians.
Right. And it's this idea that there's this higher, more important reality above England, right? And that was the core of English society to some extent. And that has been dying a slow death in British culture for a long time. Mm-hmm. So because you have secular British people who are not religious, when someone like Shamima Begum comes along, they're used to thinking of religion as some outdated, unimportant force that has no real effect on people's lives. So they don't take it seriously. A secular British person can't tell the difference between evangelical Christianity and radical Islam.
Right.
So
right.
they don't have any tools.
There's a big difference.
There's a big difference. And they don't have any tools to actually think about it properly. Which means there's no one in Shamima's school who can be like, hey, what are the kind of ideas floating around in the youth here, and how do we actually have a conversation about these things? People are just out of their depth. So, boring England with no
conviction,
with no core except go to school and go to work,
and democracy and freedom of speech,
democracy and be nice to women and minorities, right? It's just a sort of shallow shell of what England is supposed to represent. And then suddenly somebody presents young 15-year-old Shamima with, hey, you are meant to restore the order of God in the world. Leave your boring life like Harry Potter. Come to Islamic Hogwarts and become who you're supposed to
be. Oh my gosh.
Islamic Hogwarts.
That's so funny. That's actually
when
really
you put
great.
It that way.
Yeah, no. I understand the whole thing so much better now after that.
Yeah. So
because wasn't she also living in like a very, was it a predominantly Muslim area?
Yeah. Bethnal Green has tons of Muslims. The Bangladeshi community is huge there.
Okay.
I've been there a couple of times.
So it's not to say that she could have probably encountered normal Islam there as well. So you also have to ask the question, there was also something about your regular, whatever, your regular mosque, your regular ummah, your regular community that didn't stick with her either. Because
well, I think basically
what's
happening,
that wasn't enough either.
Yeah, but I think basically what's happening there is the kind of problems ISIS are addressing would be the kind of problems you hear outlined if you go to a regular British mosque to some extent.
You think? Okay.
And
at the time, probably.
At the time.
Yeah.
Shamima hears, 15-year-old Shamima hears these kind of things and thinks, okay, if everybody's talking about this, no one's doing anything about this.
Gotcha.
And so they're going to talk about Western colonialism and its effects of oppression in the Muslim world and all these things.
Okay.
And then suddenly, and every Muslim community is going to complain about Sykes-Picot in 1916. And what do ISIS do? They take a bulldozer and they break down the border between Iraq and Syria and says, we're not abiding by Western labels anymore. We are going back to what we once were. So all the problems, suddenly somebody's like, yeah, we're going to do something about it. You, young woman, come, both have a family, be a wife and a mother, and have this grand, meaningful adventure fixing the world's problems, and join with us. The only people who are actually doing something about this.
Yeah. But for that to happen, right, for her to say, be sold on that, there has to be, because we want to talk about how she was also a victim in this, and there has to be definitely, whatever her family life was, again, we there wasn't much information as to her family life, but even there must have been crippling, a crippling family structure / moral system in your own home that also, which, like you said, it could be that her family was all saying the same things of ISIS is going to fix the world, or it could just be that they were kind of, whatever it was, she found it that she couldn't, because and maybe another normal 15-year-old would be no, I have it pretty good here with my parents and my siblings or whatever, or
for the record, her family has disavowed her actions and said that they don't want her to come back.
Oh. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know. Yeah, so I'm sure that there's just so many things. There's the family life too that, to me, I'm pushed her out as well. Must have. I mean, must have.
I think you could go forever and start looking into family lives and how your culture influenced your decision-making process and what was being said in your mosque at the time, or what whatever.
What your mom thought, your dad.
And of course it's tragic, right? Because now you can sit there, you can say like, well, if there had only been some mechanism to intervene, right?
Which
like what you
James
were saying,
is
saying, you know,
Yeah.
let's have a conversation about what young people are thinking about this. I find that, like in a conservative Islamic environment, there is a degree of sympathy to what goes on in places like that, particularly at the beginning, right? So before everyone knows exactly what's going on, it's easy to sit there and take like the whatever the media is feeding you or whatever media you're listening to and saying, well, you know, they have a point, right? Like I literally had that conversation with a young Muslim from Afghanistan right after 9/11, right? Like he was like,
Yeah.
well, you know, they kind of have a point, right?
Yeah.
And I've had that conversation with other Muslims at that time, you know, and you know, the passage of time has made it more and more of an illegitimate argument, right?
Completely.
Because we could see all of the destabilizing of nations and people like this being kind of fed into a meat grinder, you know, and watching their lives get shattered and then, you know, having to like deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah.
So I'm not, and again, I'm not saying by any stretch that is the mindset of all conservative Muslims. No. I'm saying that anecdotally, I've heard these things in my interactions following, you know, the establishment of Islamic, you know, movements like this, right? Like radical terrorist movements. So when you look at her, right, and the things that she's gone through and said, and even the evolution that she's, you know, kind of like being caught on camera, right? Whether or not it's legitimate or not, it's kind of like you can't tell the jury that, well, I was brainwashed, so I shot the person, right? Because, you know, my, like, you know, Charles Manson, right? And all the people who went to prison in the murder of Sharon Tate, right? Like, it's not a defense, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing if you're clearly insane, okay? Like,
sure.
Like there's mental instability or something like that. But you're looking at a woman who has a clear arguments as to why she did what she did and why she doesn't want to do what she's doing now. So there's like an accountability of the things that she actually did that needs to be answered for. And whether or not that means she can go back to England or not is, I think, completely, in my opinion, in the hands of England. Like, you know.
Yeah, I think this someone like Shamima Begum exposes the problem of trying to think of everybody as either a victim or an oppressor.
Right.
Is Shamima Begum a victim or an oppressor? The answer is yes.
Yes and yes.
Right.
Yes and yes. Right.
Right.
She has participated in awful things, knowingly.
Horrible things.
And she's been part of evil. And part of that is being deceived.
Part of it.
Right.
Right. But in a biblical framework, being deceived is a sin. It's not just something that happens to you, it's something that you are accountable for. If you refuse to believe the truth and you believe lies, you are morally guilty for that. And what the society we're in now wants to think is if somebody doesn't, know the full truth, is deceived, well, okay, well, that's the fault.
They were deceived.
They were deceived, right? Which, again, it is true. They were deceived. Like, Shamima Begum was deceived in one way, shape, or form. Like, she thought that ISIS was going to bring about some sort of Islamic utopia on Earth. It could not and did not, and it resulted in the deaths of her 3 children, and that's the price she's paid for that. And also, she's had bad things happen to her. She's been taken advantage of. She's been, her children have died. She's been, she's experienced hardship now.
Desolation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she's experienced the death of the 3 children, and lives alone in the desert, constantly uncertain about her future.
Sure.
It's an awful life to live.
Yeah. I mean, and no one wants to obviously see that happen, but I think it's important to take like a step back from the emotions of it.
But I see,
right?
yes.
Like the emotionality, the emotional quotient of it will go, well, hasn't she suffered enough? You know, she was brainwashed as a teenager. You know, she was in a cult and all these other things. I mean, I want...
And there was also talk that, like, she was still getting threats as she was trying to get back into England.
And I mean,
like,
is she trying to save her own skin? Because they had to move her out of, like, one camp and into another where she was more safe.
So somebody's helping her,
because those people were rightly pissed off that, you know, their husbands and sons and daughters were, you know, killed by IS, and here she is participating in it, you know. So one could look at it, you know, cynically and say, you know, she's just doing all those things. She's just doing all those things so that nobody, you know, I mean, is she really sorry? You know?
Yeah. But it's a good point what James says is that it would be good for, it's hard to say, individuals in the British government, I don't know, judges and rulers and lawyers, whoever, to like also come to the realization that they're complicit indirectly in maybe, I mean, if they don't have like a strong moral ground, if they're not like, if they don't recognize like the reality of how Christianity, you know, has impacted and should continue to impact the British people, then like I mean, I think it's important to also find that compassion in a way towards people like Shamima, because you're like, oh well, we're not really holding up our ground here as far as high moral.
I kind of feel like the liberal,
other than like
secular response is like, you know, if you come off too judgment minded, right, you're going to be labeled as like you're too conservative, you're too hardcore, right? Like you're not compassionate enough. And, you know, the liberal secular response tries to fix problems like this through, you know, rehabilitation and therapy and, you know, looking at the cracks in the system that led her to being vulnerable to this kind of outside corruption and all that other stuff. But I don't think any of those really deals with the choice kind of laid before her, and I don't feel like none of those arguments really, like, to me, speak to the conscious element, you know what I mean, that you have to partake. Listen, I have anger issues, right, in my life. So let's just say, you know, do I take my anger issues and then layer them on my faith and then decide that, you know, that person who cussed me out in a you know, road rage incident deserves to die, right? Like I can't look at the things around me and say, well, they made me do it. You know what I mean? Like you have to choose, you know. And I think
you do have to choose.
Conversely, for her, it's you know, I mean,
well, maybe now she's choosing. I will argue that as a 15-year-old, I mean, your brain's not fully developed. No. You kind of are limited, literally, physiologically and biologically, as far as decision making. I mean, that's why.
I actually disagreed with her when she said that. Like, I was 15 years old and I knew what I was doing.
She knew. Oh, when she was saying that.
I was like,
right. I think if you honestly look at that, and yeah, I mean, people have kids, we know how this works. Like, no, yeah, I think that you were limited there as far as like actual making your own choices. But maybe now that she's looking back on it, maybe now she wants to make her own choice, and maybe it is choosing like.
I know, but I mean, again,
to face judgment, face the law.
We have teenagers committing crimes here in this country, like all of the time, and they get more and more serious as time goes on, right? So, you know, we're here in Seattle, and you know, people.
I think the moment, I guess what I mean. Yes, she had. If the sources are all correct, yes, she had a choice to like pack vests with bombs. That was definitely a choice at 15, 16. But maybe leaving. Maybe like being pushed out and saying, yeah, let's go join ISIS,
So
wasn't honestly like
Yeah.
kind of. I
And she
feel
didn't
like
go alone
that's not
either,
a choice.
right? She went with some friends.
She went with people.
So, you know, it wasn't spring break they were going on, right?
No. But I think here's the thing everyone has to honestly think through here. If we were defined by the person we were at 15 years old, that would suck for the rest of your life, right?
Seriously.
Like everybody knows that, right? And so she made like the motherload of stupid decisions when she was 15.
Yes.
And that is going to stick with her for the rest of her life.
Right,
and that sucks to be in that situation because everybody's an idiot to some extent when they're 15.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
So that sucks. But at the same time, the British system only knows how to think in sort of pragmatic terms, right? Like how to sort of in terms of social engineering.
Sure.
It doesn't believe in evil. And with ISIS, it saw evil and doesn't really know how to handle it.
What do you mean by they don't know how to handle it?
So
What do you mean by that?
on a few levels, right? They don't have any categories that know how to handle it, right? So I was talking with a bunch of British agnostics, and you know, my whole life I've had people argue with me about how could God order the death of every man, woman, and child in Canaan under the Israelite conquest, and I saw multiple times secular British people talking about Shamima Begum and other, you know, women and children in the camp, saying, look, the ISIS was just such an evil thing that every one of those women and children just needs to die.
They told you that?
Yeah. So that this ideology can
die.
Right? Because it's such a threat to the world that it just...
Now, this wasn't the same agnostic person. These were different groups of agnostic British people.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the same person.
No, I heard
it's a sentiment.
Yeah.
It's a sentiment.
It exists.
It's
right.
there. Not with everybody,
Yeah.
with many agnostic British people.
Sure.
That it's like there's this category of total evil needs to be, you know, destroyed
Completely.
You know, completely.
Yeah, because the guy told her,
kind of like in the Bible.
Yeah.
kind of like in the Bible.
At the end, right?
And
it all gets thrown into the lake of fire.
And the guy told her, like, so you don't want your son to be a jihadist, like he was asking about even her son. Yeah. So there's a concern there.
Yeah, right. There's a concern. So the problem is that if you don't know if England has two ways to deal with evil: shoot at it or ignore it. When ISIS was there,
shoot at it, sure.
When ISIS was there, they were shooting at it. I have no problem with that. But now that you have all these, you know, captured civilians, the British government doesn't want to execute them because England doesn't have the death penalty. And it doesn't take any responsibility for them either. Mm-hmm. So, like, my opinion as an English person is I want my government to bring Shamima Begum back to England and try her under British law.
Which is what would happen in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what would happen here.
Yeah.
That's what would happen here.
Yeah, she shouldn't, you know, she should be forced to face
Let the Dark Lord answer for his crimes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, she should answer for her crimes in England.
And be tried. Yeah.
And, you know, let well-meaning British people have access to her and try and, like, help her. Like, as a Christian, I believe the state has a role to punish evil, and I believe the church has a role to speak truth and show mercy to evil people. So I want Shamima Begum to experience God's mercy. I want her to be forgiven for the evil that she has done.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I have no problem with the government
imprisoning
her, or even executing her under the right circumstances.
Yeah, I feel like limbo is the worst place to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it even sounds like just in the passage of time, you know, and reading, hearing, watching some of the interviews and stuff like that. It's really awkward place to be like, I want to be disciplined for what I've done, right? I want to experience like consequences. And being kept in but you can't experience consequences because we're not going to let you experience anything, right? You're just going to sit here and rot to death, like you had said earlier. Is a really hard place for anyone to kind of have that redemptive moment, right? To experience that. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
With God, all things are possible, but for her, it's going to be very difficult. Yeah, depending on the outcome of wherever this case goes.
Yeah. So I think just you're pushing it off and not dealing
So I
with
hear
it.
what you're saying. So you think she should face physical consequences under the British law and experience spiritual redemption.
Yes.
I think that's your hope.
That's my hope, right?
That's your hope.
And if she has genuine spiritual redemption, there's no part of me that needs her to face any physical consequences.
But British law would.
Yeah, British law would and should carefully think about these kinds of things. The law should be thinking about proper measured justice. But justice also can have an element of if Shamima Begum.
Sorry, go ahead.
So if Shamima Begum has genuine repentance demonstrated over time, then that can affect the outcome of her sentencing, right?
It can, and also though that I don't really quite get. Yeah, I mean also that it sounds. If they were to try her, even in the Bible, you need witnesses. Even in the Bible, you need to be able to. I mean, that's how you do it in the States. Is you need to have evidence. You need to have witnesses. It sounds like a lot of what they have. No, they do have witnesses. They're her friends and stuff. They do, but also a lot of the really bad stuff sounds like it was from secret intelligence, which is also
it's still classified. I mean,
yeah,
that was the objection of some people who worked on her case with her attorneys, who said, the nature of the judgment, and not being able to hear the evidence.
Yeah.
Right. So not knowing exactly what she was being accused of, and not hearing, a case all the evidence presented.
I think that's important. Yeah.
Is something. I mean, it's actually interesting to note that there are, I think, Nicaragua and one other country and the UK are the ones who strip people of citizenship the most.
It almost sounds like a cop-out.
Yeah, right.
It almost sounds like a cop-out. They don't want to deal with it.
On the flip side, though, it's we value it, and we're not going to let you degrade it either.
We value it? What do you mean?
Okay, we believe the argument could be made, and I'm not British, right? The argument could be made that, British citizenship in the eyes of, the legal system in the UK, or the political system in the UK, is such a valuable attribute to any individual that if you sully it, we're going to withdraw it, right? The consequence of essentially degrading, being a British citizen who doesn't act up to the standard is going to be removed. Right?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think if you applied that consistently, though, there'd be 5 British people.
Yeah, no, I get it. And,
right.
I think that's the hard part.
I don't think it works.
So this is the problem, right? Particularly in dealing with the clash of ideologies here.
Yes.
Right? So Islam is a powerful force.
Islam is powerful.
Okay?
Force. Mm-hmm.
And like we were talking about earlier, the secular state doesn't necessarily know how to navigate it or much less how to deal with it when it's not in congruence with the British state. So what does it do, right? Does it resort directly to exile? Does it crack down, like you were saying, right? You shoot at it, or do you ignore it? Well, ignoring it leads to where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? So ignoring it leads to where this girl wound up.
And
we ignored it, and I mean, everyone is aware of the fact that, mosques all over the world had at the time, some sympathy, right, to what was going on. Or at the very least, Islamic footprint in those areas allowed young people like her to be able to hear a very radicalizing message and take a step toward it. I mean,
thousands of people.
Thousands of people, right? And you know, for her to for that to be ignored, okay, and not addressed, right? In the name of, you know, we don't want to deal with it, or we're trying to be tolerant and allow people to express their views or whatever, is like the number one tactic of like a radical. So in Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, which is like read by all kinds of revolutionary movements all over the world, the point is to use the state against itself, right? Is to take the mechanism of the state and then just kind of use its like inability to adjust, right? Like its tolerance.
I see what you're saying.
You know, in expressing ideas and use it against itself. So that's just like a political, you know, revolutionary tactic that. No, for
sure.
You know, all
it's
terrorists
just usurping each
yeah.
other all the time. But yeah, like I just feel like there's not. I don't even. Yeah, I mean, I feel like at the same time, yeah, for sure, the British government is just like, we don't know what to do with you, even legally, like even bringing up evidence, even like just using like truly being just in this case, and so they're keeping her in limbo, which it kind of reminds me of, not like in the Bible it's much different, it's specifically for manslaughter, but you know, like the towns, for
cities of refuge.
The cities of refuge, or people, not that the camps are cities, you know, the camp in Syria is a city of refuge, but having those, and that there are cases like this. Anyway, that's like a whole other podcast, but about cities of refuge.
Those are accidental. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's to protect you from the outcome of, like, something happened by accident and then receiving direct retribution from
sure
the person.
But like, there's still a process though if a person goes there and hasn't done it by accident, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. Shamima is now denied any process of appeals or any kind of higher court of justice to appeal to, where she can go. Like, she should at least be able to go somewhere and say, okay, here I am, you know, kill me or let me live, just make a decision. Right? That's what she should have. That was always something in biblical law. In biblical law, somebody's always responsible for you.
I have a really hard time with this, just on a personal level, because the more and more we talk about it, the more and more I realize, you know, jihadis have like hurt my family for as long as I can remember, right? Like this brand of radical Islam that you know will do what the Taliban did to my relatives, right? My father didn't have to go through that, but he still had to experience the loss, right? Like, of his family members and his relatives, and not being able to go home, and, you know, just watching your homeland be destroyed over and over again by these people, and then again to watch it happening, like, again, you know, regardless of whatever's anyone's opinion of like the 2022 Taliban is, right?
Yeah.
Versus what it was in the early 90s. You know, I want to like take hold of a sympathy for her, right? And it's really hard for me, like as a, you know, like I'm trying to look at it as a Christian, but I'm also trying to look at it from my own like personal experience, right? Which is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And where I land is, this whole thing is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Right? I want her on one hand to answer for what she did.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, my heart is breaking for her because of what she is. And where she is. And the thing that I keep coming back to is whatever happened in the past, right? Like, we all have choices we can make in the now. You know what I mean? Like, I think about Moses a lot. Like, it says in the book of Hebrews that Moses, like, grew up in Egypt, and he grew up in this really, like, sinful environment, you know, that was, like, kind of percolating and oppressing his
Yes.
people and everything else like that. But instead, it says in Hebrews 11:24, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So I kind of feel like choice leads you into a place, but choice can lead you out of a place too. You see what I'm saying? Like,
I agree.
The choice is set before her,
true.
regardless of whatever anyone else does to her.
Yeah.
Or wherever they put. And I'm with you, James. Like, I believe what the British government should do is repatriate her and try her for her crimes, right? And allow for, some element of justice and redemption to kind of hopefully come out of this.
Yeah.
So, let's land here because we're running long here, but let's say that Shamima Begum, we know what we think England should do. We kind of have an opinion of what her life has been up to this point, what should happen to her to some extent, right? But let's say Shamima Begum is so bored, but the Syrian refugee camp has a better than usual Wi-Fi signal, so she's just scrolling on her phone, looking for videos about herself, looking at all commentary analysis. If Shamima's listening right now, both of you guys take 2 minutes to say something to Shamima directly.
You first.
No, I don't know. I haven't. I think you were getting there. I think you were getting there.
I feel like no matter what you've gone through or what you've done, that there's no place that God can't bring redemption into your life. And no matter what your external circumstances are, that there's an answer to your problems that will be able to supersede whatever your natural circumstances are. And that is receiving and accepting Jesus. Because, I, like you, at one point was a Muslim. I mean, it sounds like you're still a Muslim, but I, like you, at one point was a Muslim. And my life didn't start to come together for me, despite all the crazy, choices. You can look me up. My name is Ibar Zuchkun, and my testimony is out there somewhere.
I love it.
Of all the things that I chose, and my life came together the night that I heard Jesus introduce himself to me as Yeshua, Isa, the Messiah. So I think that there's hope for you, and I think that you can find the answers outside of the systems that you've been operating in, right? Like, it's not a legal solution to me, and it's not necessarily just a religious solution. It's what's the truth.
Yeah.
And I would be honest in saying the truth can only be found in Jesus.
Yeah. Going off of that, I would just say we're praying for you. That God.
Yeah, that's a much better answer.
No. No. Going off of that,
right.
we're praying for you that God would reveal true justice for you, true conviction for you, in the camp, wherever you find yourself now, that God would still reveal himself truly in Jesus. Because he's the only one that can do it for real, and he can set you free even if you stay in a camp for the rest of your life. He can find you anywhere. Jesus can find you
and change
anywhere.
Your circumstances
and give you hope,
right?
But liberate your soul more than anything. But we're praying for that. Because we have to pray for that. We have to pray for that. So we're praying that, God would find you.
So I would say that no government in the world wants you. No country wants you to be a part of what they're doing. Your own family have disowned you and have distanced themselves from you. And you deserve all of it. Right? You deserve all the judgment that you have gotten. But God still loves you. And God is willing to provide a way through Jesus for the judgment you deserve to be diverted from you and taken onto Jesus. And even me, we can have a clean future with God. And God wants you to be part of his country, his better country, his kingdom, and is inviting you to do that. And if you meet the God who is king of this universe, you'll gain a new family who does want you. We want you to be in our family. We want you to be our sister. We want you to receive forgiveness and have a future. And if that happens, we'll be there for you, Shamima.